The Tour Guide's Guide to Art. Every week in this feature we strive to bring you museums or galleries that are just a little bit extraordinary, and today is no different. Unlike conventional museums, you can't touch or even see the exhibits at the Myth Stories Museum of Myth and Fable. That's because the exhibits are actually age-old stories brought to life through regular telling and then illustrated with a series of paintings, puppets, automata, artefacts, tablets and books. At Myth Stories, visitors are invited to piece together myths from all over the world in a space that's dedicated to keeping oral history alive. Telling us more now from our Shrewsbury studios, the museum's founder and resident storyteller, Des Quarrell. Welcome to the Radio 2 Art Show, Des.
Hi Claudia, very nice to be here.
What an extraordinary museum. What kind of stories does the museum deal in, and where do they come from?
They come from all over the world. We do concentrate on local stories. Yeah. For about 50% of the time, but then we cast our net really wide. They're myths, fables, legends, folk tales, trickster tales, any kind of story that stood the test of time.
Oh, I love the idea of a trickster tale. Myth Stories is described, and I love this, as an intangible museum.
Yeah, you can't touch that.
You really can't, as MC Hammer said. So people arrive and what happens? Talk to me about the experience.
I suppose the first thing that hits them when they come through the door is that it's a very colourful collation. A sexy pink hallway peopled with wonderful artistic artefacts. And the thing is that we try and piece the artefacts together in such a way, and the paintings too, that they actually tell a narrative of a story or suggest one to the audience who come in. It's not the interactivity of pressing buttons or turning handles. It's the interactivity of making mental connections, suggesting stories. And before long, people find themselves telling themselves stories. And after about 15 minutes of working their way around the museum, opening this, closing that, piecing this or that together and playing about generally, I'll join them and say, come along, join me in the Gypsy Caravan and I'll tell you a story.
Oh, God, and is the Gypsy Caravan as fabulous as I'm assuming?
Well, we love it. It was made by some local traveller pupils from the secondary school who wanted to show their culture had a great deal to offer. And of course it has. They're probably the only keepers of the oral tradition in the true sense in this country.
How fabulous. And do you have absolute favourite stories that you always want to go back to, or do you love also discovering new?
Oh, both. But yes, definitely. There are some stories that you just can't get out of your mind. They're very personal things, and each storyteller has their own favourites, which they will return to over and over again.
This experience also exists outside the museum as well, doesn't it? Do you also go to places and tell people wonderful stories?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our work's educational, so we might find ourselves in the classroom, but we'd rather find ourselves in somewhere that suggested a story, like taking the pupils for a walk around a lake, or maybe taking an audience down into a cave, dark antediluvian spaces that suggest all kind of really archaic myths and legends.
Oh my God, I love your voice. It sounds absolutely amazing. You do a lot of outreach work with schools, don't you? Tell us about that.
Well, we do all manner of projects. We're working on one at the moment in nearby Telford, and that's encouraging young storytellers to tell their own tales and encouraging schools to have storytelling corners like they have library corners.
Yes, isn't that genius? I believe you've got an exhibit of the month. What is it this month?
This month it's the Raven Art Box, which is a very, very large treasure chest. It's an automata, so you can turn a handle on the side, and when you do, two large ravens on the top clap their wings, and the mechanism makes such a din it sounds like they're actually squawking at you too in unison.
You have got the most magnificent voice. I know this is mean to spring this on you. You don't have a 2-minute tale to share with us, do you? No.
Oh, I'll tell you one of my favourites.
Go on.
There was a boy who loved the woods. He loved playing out in the woods, but one day he stayed too long, and his mother was worried sick about him. But then, all of a sudden, in the rising gloom, she heard the crunch on the gravel of footsteps, but it wasn't the normal crunch. It was a sort of... She looked out the window and it was him, and she said, "Boy, where have you been, boy, and why are you dragging that leg behind you?" He said, "Ma, I met the fairies." She said, "None of that. All those stories are gone. You've had your time in the woods. Now come in and tell me all about it." And walk round that table, boys, so I can see how you're dragging that leg. He walked round the table saying, I met the fairies, Ma. She said, no, come on, sit yourself down, roll that trouser leg up and let's have a look. And he rolled the trouser leg up to above the knee, and there, on his knee, was a gash. A really, really weeping gash. It was bleeding and bubbling with blood, and she took the flannel to it and cleaned it up. And there, in the middle of the cut, just in the mouth of the wound, was a tiny little piece of brown paper. So she did what any mother would do. She went over to the work basket and fetched her tweezers, and she tried to get rid of the obstacle in the wound. She started to pull, and more brown paper came. But it was like a magician pulling those scarves out of his sleeve. She just couldn't stop. She carried on pulling and pulling until the brown paper was crunching under her slippers and scratching at her shins. I suppose it was that made her stop. And when she stopped, she went to fetch the scissors, and she cut the piece of brown paper and bandaged the boy's knee up and sent him off to bed and said, it'll be all right in the morning, it'll be all right. Well, in the morning she packaged up all the brown paper in a sack and left it out the back door for the men to burn. But, well, it wasn't all right in the morning. That boy is now a very, very old man, and if you go down to the post office on a Thursday morning, you might see him there, dragging his leg behind him, and all the people in the queue will be turning to one another and saying, there goes old Paperleg, he met the fairies.
Brilliant!
That's my favourite.
Oh, it's absolutely fantastic. I could listen to you forever, but the next guest will be livid. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It sounds amazing. Enormous thanks to Des for that tour guide's guide to Myth Stories, Museum of Myth and Fable in Wem.